welcome to Desert Wanderers, produced by Salt and Light Radio. If you're new here, we bridge the gap between you and the person in the pew next to you. I will be interviewing priests, religious, and laity in our local Boise diocese, asking questions that'll help you navigate your vocation and help build community wherever you are with whatever resources you may have. Let's build the city of God together. All right, so we are here with Father Nelson Cintra. I'm so excited to have you on today. This is actually round 2 for us. We we had some problems with Zoom recording, and we missed about the first 30 minutes. Didn't get downloaded, which is probably my fault. But anyways, we're here to give some context because we have a really great podcast that we had previously recorded, and we just need to fill in some gaps. So, Father, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to have you on today.
And it was a good thing that we memorized everything that we said. That way we'll be able to repeat it verbatim exactly how we said it the first time. So no problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that was actually one of my fears is I was like, oh, I don't even think you can strike lightning twice. Like, but this is going to be great because it's like starting all over and it's going to be like original lightning right now. So that's what I
Yes.
have to say.
Yeah. No, and I'm grateful to have another opportunity to talk with you. And yeah, I look forward to seeing how this is going to go and how people receive it and where it goes in the future.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and just start with your story. So, when did you first receive the call, to become a priest? Like, when did you start to have inklings of that vocation?
You know, I was just listening this morning, so there's something new that wasn't in our first rendition. I was just listening this morning to a priest, Father Carlos Martins. He's now, I think that's how you say his name, but he's now the spiritual guide for Exodus 90 for the St. Michael's Lent. And he was answering that question, and he had a very specific, a very audible moment in which he heard a voice. He said, a voice saying, "Go be a priest." And he did. And I was just reflecting on that. Like that was definitely not my experience. And I wonder how common that is. I suspect it's fairly rare, but I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to see if there's been any kind of studies done on that. But no, my call, so to speak, on my journey towards the priesthood was definitely much more winding and convoluted and messy and naughty as in knots, lots of knots, and complicated. Pope Benedict had this analogy of our relationship with God is not so much like jumping into a pool, it's more like stepping out into the ocean. So taking first the toes and the feet and the down to the knee level and so on and so on. And it was more like that for me for both in regards to God, but then also in regards to the priesthood. So I grew up in a Catholic family, although with some struggles, and I think we'll get into that, or maybe we did in the second half. I'm not sure. We'll see. But the a Catholic family, I received the sacraments. I was baptized as a baby, then I was received my first communion at normal age, and then I was confirmed. I was in high school. That was a little bit late. I think I was 16, 17 in high school, but uh, my first 13 years were in Brazil, and there, Brazil is a Catholic country, officially speaking, but the culture has been really secularized, especially in the cities. And I was in Rio de Janeiro, and so I had some contact with Catholicism, but I had largely a secular upbringing. I did have an older sister who had become pretty committed to the faith at a young age, and she's a few years older than me. She's 8 years older than me, and I looked up to her, and I saw this happen to her, and I saw that it brought her a lot of joy and a lot of life. Even though once I started thinking about things, I started discrediting the veracity of the Catholic claims, but I saw that it produced good fruits in my sister. And so at least I had that as a first positive touch point with Catholicism. And then she encouraged me at a young age to not only to pursue God, but also to pursue the priesthood. And so I think she really planted the seed early on, I think. And I did go to a Catholic school from the first through the eighth grade or seventh grade, and had good experiences there and good experiences with the priests, the Augustinian friars that were in the school. One of them in particular used to often stay after school and play soccer with us, and that definitely had a made a big imprint on my life. And so the seed was there from an early stage, but then in adolescence and my college years and young adulthood, I went very far away from Catholicism, from the church, from God. And even though the thought about priesthood would actually pop up from time to time, especially when I considered marriage, in contrast to considering marriage in different situations, I always had kind of this nagging thought about the priesthood. And it really was nagging, I thought I tried to run away from it and tried to bury it, and that didn't work very well. But so I eventually did come back to the faith, and we can go into that. And then after a few years of returning to a full practice of Catholicism, I was receiving spiritual direction. Then I applied to the seminary. And seminary was a long process. I ended up being a seminarian for a total of 9 years. Six of those were in seminary per se, within 3 years in the diocese doing various things. So seminary itself was a long period of discernment of considering, is this really how I'm going to spend the rest of my life? Do I want to do this? Does the church want me to do this? And so that took a long time. And so then I finally became a priest just last year, 2023. And so I've been a priest for a little over a year.
So then let's go back a little bit further into your story. So you said that you grew up in Brazil.
Hmm.
So when did you first come to the US? And were you in
1999.
Idaho?
1999, not first to Idaho, first to Ohio. So my mother is half American, half Brazilian. She grew up in Brazil. She's culturally mostly Brazilian, but genetically and as far as what is it, civically, she has dual citizenship. And so her father was American from Ohio, and he went to Brazil with the army and met my grandmother and stayed. So we had this American contingency developing. He had several siblings, and so we have tons of cousins, second and third cousins in Ohio and surrounding areas. And so when he died, so my dad had died when I was young, when I was just 13 months, just a year old. And so my mother had been raising me by herself. And then my grandfather was helping a bit. When he died in 1997, my mother started considering coming moving to the US to join our American family and provide better opportunities for me. And so 2 years later, we came. We first went to Ohio, as I said, and I went to high school and college there. And then after college, I started working in different things, and through a roundabout way, ended up coming to Idaho to work at an alternative boarding high school for at-risk youth out in Arco, which is just not too far from here, just an hour from where I am now.
Yeah. And so then what brought you to the boys community?
So my degree was in psychology, and I didn't really have a firm direction as to what I wanted to do with that. There's a saying in in the undergraduate psychology world that an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in psychology qualifies you to volunteer and to wait tables and to be a camp counselor. And so I did all three of those things after college. And I first went to California to work at a summer camp out there and did that for 2 summers. And during that time, started looking for something more stable, something that would be year round, something that would be kind of advancing a career, but also something that would be more on an outdoor setting, kind of alternative education setting. And so I just found this school randomly. There was a website, I think it was called outdoored.com or .org. That was just a job board for listings, and just applied to a few of them and landed an interview in this place in Arco, Idaho. Arco is a town of 950 people,
Yeah.
and the school is 15 miles away from town up in the mountains, so it's really remote. So I flew into Boise and rented a car and drove out to Arco, and it was December, and this was for the interview, and I fell in love with the scenery. Everything was covered in snow,
Yeah. So
and
beautiful.
got out there, spent a couple of days at the school, and at the end of my visit, I was offered the job, and so I came back a few weeks later and started. So that was January of 2008. 2011 is when I started.
Okay, and so then with that being said, were you practicing your faith at this point or no?
I was not quite, I mean, I was in and out at this point. So in 2009, I read Mere Christianity, which I just reread recently, and that book is amazing. But I read it for the first time in 2009, and that kind of gave a bit of a direction to my search. I graduated college 2008. Between 2008 2009, started kind of asking these bigger questions about God, about faith, about truth, about religion, and about Catholicism. I think the Catholic claims can be kind of summarized in three questions. Like, does God exist? Yes. Is Jesus God? Yes. Is Jesus the bridegroom of the church? Did Jesus found the church? Is Jesus and the church one? Yes. If you can answer those three questions, then you're a Catholic. I mean, that the next step is to become a Catholic,
Yeah.
to be fully initiated. And so that was kind of how my journey went, trying to answer these questions. And by no means that I exhaust all the possible answers to them, but I was kind of in a systematic kind of intellectual search, trying to find enough evidence to support these claims that the Catholic Church made, that Catholicism made. And so C.S. Lewis, who is not Catholic, but his book is a great introduction that helped me to answer the questions not only for God, but then also for Christ, that Christ is God. And then so by the time I came to the ranch, we called it the ranch. It's called Wisdom Ranch School. By the time I came to the ranch, I had been progressing in that direction, but I hadn't yet fully accepted the answer that the Catholic Church is the bride of Christ, that the Church and Christ are one. And that came later that same year, in August of 2011, at World Youth Day in Madrid. And so
Did
then
you attend World Youth Day?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
That that was the first one. I've gone a few times now, but that was the first one, and that was the one that I really kind of gave my life to Christ and to the church and said, and I can share that story, but basically just said, God, I give you my life. And then I stayed at that ranch for 3 more years, but my practice of Catholicism was accelerating at that point, and I was reading the daily readings of the Mass every day, pray the Rosary every day, consuming podcasts and Catholic radio, and reading books and having conversations with priests. Father Chase Hassan was out there. Father Caleb Vogel was the vocations director, so I started speaking with them,
Wow.
and things just went from there.
So what was your role at the boys' school at the
I,
ranch?
w- I was what we called a student mentor, basically an older brother.
Mm.
I lived, so we had on shift, off shift. When I was off shift, I was totally gone, often here in Idaho Falls. But when I was on shift, I lived with the boys and stayed in the yurts. We lived in yurts and stayed with them, and you know, did everything from helping with homework, helping with chores, ranch chores, house chores, helping with random projects like carpentry and mechanics, and then also like help like break up fights. Like I had to break up a few fights. Being with kids, kids, they were teenagers, but being with the guys in difficult times. Also recreation, going on hikes, going snowboarding, going to the movies, going out to dinner. So yeah, it's kind of a bit older brother.
And then, okay, you said that you lived in a yurt. Now, is this
Hmm.
like the circle yurt with like the tent material, or is it a little more stable than that? What does that look like? My first thought is a yurt in December or January or February even. Sounds very cold.
Right. Yes, it was. Yes, a yurt, a glorified tent, and there were two sets of two. So we call it like the first yurt and the second yurt, but really each one had two yurts side by side because one was the living yurt and then the other was the kitchen, and then there was an outhouse on the outside. And yeah, the yurts were heated by a wood stove, so we would chop our wood and start the fire and have to get up in the middle of the night and stoke it. And I'll share a story in a bit about, yeah, about being in the fire, by sitting by the fire, and just kind of that started to develop something of a prayer life, kind of just watching the fire burn and sitting with that. But the yurts. we would have to like fill our buckets with water from the well and then dump the water into the bucket shower and then on the pulley system, pull the bucket up and tie it. And that's how we had water for a shower. And
Wait,
if we
wait,
wanted
wait.
hot,
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what about hot
yeah,
water?
yeah, if we wanted hot water, we'd put the bucket on the stove and heat it. And here was the perfect ratio. You took two big buckets, two big pots of water, and you brought one to a boil and you kept the other one cold. And then you mixed them together, and that was the
Yeah.
perfect temperature.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, hold on.
Hmm.
So like we're talking when you say you live in a yurt, are you really stripped of a lot of luxuries, like normal things that people find normal? Like obviously you said there's an outhouse. So
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
having to stoke the fire to keep the yurt warm. You're having to boil water for your showers. Like
Hmm.
what other
Hmm.
kind of, and I mean, and what's the philosophy behind this as well,
Yeah,
if you could go
right.
into that. It's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, so there's this whole field of alternative education also connected with wilderness therapy. And we weren't, if anybody knows what that is, wilderness therapy, we weren't, strictly speaking, we weren't a wilderness therapy program, but we were kind of the next stage beyond wilderness therapy. So what would happen is various schools from around the country. We were mostly connected with schools out on the East Coast and some schools in Texas and in Southern California. So that's where most of our students came from. Students or these schools, they would have guidance counselors. I think most high schools do. Will have a guidance counselor and a psychologist or a therapist. And if there are students that are not doing well in school, whether they're failing all their classes or they're getting in trouble with the law, they're stealing, they're using drugs, alcohol, they're getting into some violence, then these counselors, they're connected with these, what were they called? Education consultants. And the education consultants were connected with these different programs around the country. Wilderness therapy programs. So not quite ours yet, but wilderness therapy programs. And the wilderness therapy would serve as a intervention. And so the school and the parents working together would take the students into this intervention program, a wilderness therapy program, where they would be really out in the wilderness backpacking for a few weeks at a time, and they would be guided by licensed therapists and be kind of hopefully trying to bring them to this point of conversion, not a religious conversion necessarily, but a conversion of okay, where my life is headed is not a good direction, and I better change course, otherwise it's not going to end well. And so they would do that for a few weeks or a few months, and then some students would be ready to return home, but oftentimes the educational consultants would then recommend a follow-up program, one that would be more stable, more extensive, and would help them either continue their high school education or even finish their high school education before they went on to college or went on into the job market. And so that's what we were. And so they would come, most of them from wilderness therapy programs, come to us and be with us from 6 months to 2 years. Some of them would graduate from us. And they had more luxuries than they did while they were in their wilderness therapy programs. They had a bed to sleep on, for example, but they definitely didn't have all the full luxuries of being back home. And these are more upper middle class to upper class students. And so yeah, very few luxuries. The 2 years, the first one was more rustic. The second one actually had electricity via a solar panel. So you kind of graduated to that one to be able to have light. So otherwise, in the first year, we'd just be working with candles and lanterns and headlights or headlamps, I mean. And and then yeah, which provided actually for a good environment as far as like just kind of reconnecting with basic things, chopping wood and building things. And in the evenings, would set up lanterns and play board games. Played a lot of Risk during those years.
Yeah.
And
I think
so in
that's I think
chess, played a lot of chess. Hmm.
there's a lot of I think often now and it's becoming more and more crucial, but we have this like we're so detached from physical reality. You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Hmm.
That
Right.
even I think parents who are considering homeschooling or any of these kinds of things, they're all kind of seeing this as really valuable.
Yeah.
Even for like little kids, you see schools like Montessori and Waldorf and other kind of like alternative ideas to education,
Right.
because like, yeah, it's not good for us to be working on a screen and working with something that's not physical. And I think again, this kind of goes into some other things, but like metaphysics is all about like your senses. You experience things through your senses. And I think there's something to that, that even though they might not be thinking about metaphysics, they're kind of going back to the root, which is our foundations and our senses. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. And metaphysics. So it sounds like you've been spending some time with the brothers of Urban Spey.
Yeah, well, not recently, not since we had our
Mm.
kids, not as much. But we have done a couple of weekends,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
again, it's always so forefront in my mind. It was so influential when I did go to the metaphysics
Hmm. Hmm.
classes.
Hmm.
Okay,
No, but you're right. Yeah. And I think yeah, it is something that a lot of families are tapping into. And it's not, of course, technology is neutral, is no technology is morally neutral. It doesn't have a
right.
moral value. It's how we use it, and we can use it for good, like hopefully we're doing right now on the Zoom
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
and producing this podcast. But we can also use it for evil. The thing that's particularly pernicious about our current technology, especially social media and our cell phones, is that they're so ordered towards addiction.
Yeah.
Everything is built in towards keep making us addicted, keeping us addicted to it, to increase our screen time more and more. And so it's like even though the technology itself is neutral, the people behind the scenes, I'm not saying that they're the devil or something, but they're trying to make money, and the way to make money is to keep us addicted. And so, and it works because it appeals to our lower faculties and our disordered passions. And so we're so easily stimulated, and there's the whole thing about dopamine and these things. And so it's like if we're not extra cautious and intentional and growing in discipline. I mean, nobody does it perfectly. Maybe the brothers do it perfectly, but
Sure.
growing in discipline of regulating our use of technology, it can it can really take us down. And that's true for adults. It's all the more
Yeah.
true for kids.
Yeah.
So parents have to be intentional about how much and how and when they're allowing their kids to use technology. But anyways, I know we'll get into that later as far as parenting and
Yeah.
we haven't mentioned yet the little surprise. Last time you said we're gonna have a surprise. You said that right at
Oh
the
yeah,
beginning.
that's true. Surprise. We are going to have a surprise at the end of the
Uh-huh.
video.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, now it's an extra surprise. It's a
Yeah.
surprise surprise. Like having kids that are in that spirit, did you really have to work on confrontation, like management and stuff, and just like
Oh, a
working with
lot.
them on just regulating their emotions in like certain ways? I mean, I'm sure that all comes into what you were doing as like the big brother.
Hmm. Oh, a lot. Yeah, that was a big part of. Well, I would say it was a reoccurring part of our job. It wasn't like it was the constant, and there's definitely a lot more to it than just breaking up fights or resolving conflict, but it was definitely a big part of it. And a lot of, yeah, I'm just thinking like how did I do that, or what kind of training? I didn't have a ton of training. I mean, I did have that undergraduate degree in psychology, but they said that qualified me to volunteer and wait tables. So I'm not sure I was qualified to do that. I think it was on the job training. We had a good boss. His name is Monty. He's still out there. The school has morphed into something a little different now, but he had a lot of experience. He was in the Marines, and then he worked in wilderness therapy for a long time, and then he started this school and this ranch. And so a lot of it was receiving mentorship from him and from another gentleman that ran the program with him. His name was John, and then learning from one another, learning from experiences, briefing and debriefing things. But a lot of it was just, yeah, being available, being present to the boys, to the men, to the young men, being developing relationships with them and knowing and helping to communicate, hoping to communicate to them that they were loved, in one way or another, like that them getting in trouble or getting into fights didn't lessen our
Yeah.
concern for them, our love for them, our care for them.
Yeah. That's something that I'm starting to have to, I mean, this is very different. I'm working with a 2-year-old, but I'm starting to, I'm really, yeah, it's hard because when I want to correct my son, right? Like I want to correct him and put him in timeout, but then at the same time, like trying to make it like it's not a big deal, right? I don't know. It's interesting because I think it can be lasting even into adulthood, how we deal with like bad behavior, right? And that's the
Mhm.
whole, like, I think that's what I try. I'm not good at it, but what I try is like, this is a behavior, this isn't you, right? Like separating
Mhm.
the person from the action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but like at this point, so you said that
Mhm.
you're starting to come back, you're starting to like um take your faith more seriously. So like how is that affecting the boys? Are you allowed to talk about God or like is this like or how can you share because like when you're talking about telling them that they're loved, there's like, it's one thing to tell them that they're loved, but it's another thing to be like, you were loved and created by God and you are a son of
Mhm.
God. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, so
Mhm.
how does that like play into this time period?
Right. Well, reflecting back on it now, I was very much just in the beginning stages of my own journey. And so I certainly wasn't a great, mentor or guide for them. And I don't know that I even would have had those words to say those things. To the question, was it allowed? It was allowed because it was a private school and the owner is Catholic, and so he allowed for it. It wasn't a Catholic school. It wasn't a Catholic program, but he allowed me to, yeah, talk about things as I was discovering them. And then I would make myself available to take people to church. So, I'd go to mass at St. Anne's in Arco, and I would invite people to come, and I would come to Idaho Falls for things, and invited people to come to the youth group in Idaho Falls, and a few did that. And I went to ICYC one year and brought three or four of the students.
Wow, that's
One of
probably
the students,
awesome.
it was, yeah. There's a beautiful story from one of the students about ICYC that that he shared with me the next day, where ICYC has, of course, something of a climax at the adoration night
Yeah.
on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And this student was not Catholic, and this was the first time that he had been an environment like this. And he's at this school, this ranch, so he's gotten into a lot of trouble before. And we're there in the big conference room. I can't remember. It wasn't a Bishop Kelly, I don't think. I think it had already. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly where it was, if it had already moved or if it was still Bishop Kelly. But in any case, we're there, and they say now we're going to do adoration. They have the little introduction, and he's kind of paying attention, kind of not. And then they turn the lights out and the music changes, and he's starting to just get weirded out. What's going on here? And then people get on their knees, and he's like, "What kind of cult is this? Why is it, why is everyone getting on their knees?" And then the priests and the seminarians start coming around with this weird circular gold weird looking thing, and everybody's looking at it, and there's a spotlight on it, and it's like, what is going on? And then as it starts getting closer, he sees people are crying, like these, and he's thinking to himself, these people are insane. They're literally insane. They're having this really strong emotional experience to this gold object that these people are bringing around. And then as they got closer to him, he said that all of his memories of things that he had done to hurt other people were coming to the surface. All of
Wow.
his own memories of sinning and of hurting others were all bubbling up. And he started to feel really anxious and really agitated, really restless. and he started to try to push it out, and he was kneeling because he didn't want to stand out, and he didn't want to stand up and walk away because he didn't want to stand out. So he's just kneeling there, and he's trying to suppress this. He's trying to make it go away, trying to think about other things. And finally, as the Eucharist gets right on him, he says, this is him sharing the story. He just looks at the Eucharist and says, "I'm sorry." And instantly, all of that anxiety, all of that restlessness, all of that fear, all of that worry melted away.
Wow. That's insane. I'm like tearing up over here. That's so
Hmm.
powerful.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's cool because I think when we encounter like even if you're a cradle Catholic and you've gone to mass, you know? So when adoration comes around, it's still really profound, still really impactful. But like what a witness from someone that has no experience. Like that's their first experience with the
Hmm.
Eucharist. Like it's
Hmm.
so beautiful and just like impressive to be honest. Just like
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
beautiful witness of what God was doing in his life in that moment. So that's
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
cool. So
Yeah.
okay, so you guys were able to like share your faith. Man, that is
Hmm.
so cool. How cool would it be to take kids to ICYC too, though?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, that's really fun as well.
Yeah. And 2000, so 2011 and then 2013 was the next World Youth Day, and that was in Brazil. And I have still have my siblings and cousins in Brazil, in Rio, which is where World Youth Day was. And so I went and I took three of those students, and we joined another group. We went with a group from Texas, from Regnum Christi, that I'd been connected with via the first World Youth Day. And so yeah, so these three students came to World Youth Day, and I don't know if you have you been to a World Youth Day?
I haven't. No, I
So
haven't.
it's ICYC on a heavy
Steroids.
dosage of steroids.
Yeah, I like the heavy dosage part.
Yeah, because there were 3.5 million in Rio, if I remember correctly, and and that's a lot of people. And
Can you imagine
the
putting on that as an event? Like,
it's
do you
no
know how much
joke.
planning? Sorry, just the
Yeah.
logistics.
Right,
Be
right.
insane.
And and things changing constantly. So there is this big open space that they were planning on doing the last night. So the last night, like, is also kind of the climax. So it's Saturday going into Sunday, where there's a big pilgrimage. Everybody walks from wherever they are up to this final location, and there are events in the evening, and then you camp out at that spot. And then in the morning, there's some events, and then the closing mass, and people go home. Well, it poured down rain for like 3 days, and so that open space got washed out, and it was unusable. And so they had to switch. They had to change location to, where you're gonna find another location that can fit 3.5 million people. So they had to do it. So they did it on the beach, on Copacabana Beach. And if you look up photos of this, it's absolutely incredible. Like you can't see the sand, you just see people. And so Saturday night they had Matt Maher down there singing, adoration songs. And and he was singing, Lord, I need you. But then he was, leading people into silence. And Pope Francis, he had just become Pope. He was the Pope already for this one. And they were leading us into silence, and everyone went into silence. So there were 3.5 million people on Copacabana Beach in silence, adoring the Blessed Sacrament.
That's insane. The idea that you said 3 million
Hmm.
could be silent. Like,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
almost think that it would be eerie if it
Hmm.
wasn't
Hmm.
like
hmm
if it wasn't an adoration, you know?
hmm hmm Yes. Yeah, I made back then I made a kind of a little video collage of that trip I can send to you if you want to link it to this talk.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Okay, sorry. We we've gone a
Yeah.
lot. So let's go
Hmm.
back. So you are working at the ranch,
Hmm.
and I know that you alluded to this earlier, but you said you have a story about the fire. So you had to stoke the fire or you had to feed the fire twice a night. Is that right?
Right. So the the year, in the winter months, it was heated by a wood stove, and so we would stoke it at night, and then somebody would have to get up in the middle of the night, and then somebody would get up again about 6 o'clock and stoke it again. And school would start, I want to say 8 or 8:30, and school was just up the road. And so a lot of the students they weren't getting up until 7:45, 7:55, and running out of the house. And so I just kind of got into this routine of getting up to stoke the fire at 6, but then instead of going to bed, just sitting there and watching the fire burn for half an hour and a half. And I hadn't ever had a practice like this before of getting up early for anything and doing some sort of meditation or prayer or just quiet time. I had never done this before in my life until this season. And I would just at first it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to develop a prayer practice. It was just like I'm going to stoke the fire, and then, oh, it's nice here and it's warm and this chair is comfortable and it's kind of fun to watch a fire burn, to watch wood burn. And then the cat Maxine would come and jump on my lap, and I'd sit there and pat the cat and watch the fire burn. And I would do this, day after day and week after week. And so looking back, I think that was the beginning of a prayer life, of a more life of still prayer, not necessarily with words, not necessarily with formulae, and of course all those things are good. We need habits of prayer, but then yeah, to be able to maybe go deeper, as the brothers say, and just be with God, just adore God, just be in His presence. And Saint John Vianney, there's this famous story about him of the the peasant that would come to the church every morning and just stare at the Eucharist. And one day the Saint John Vianney asked him, what do you do when you're here in adoration every morning? And he said, I look at him and he looks at me. And that's it, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. And I'm not saying the fire, I guess it was a bit of a burning bush experience, the fire burn. I'm not saying the fire is God, of course, and it's the same thing as adoring the Blessed Sacrament, but yeah, but the early stages of developing a habit of being still and being in prayer. And I'm still in the early stages, don't get me wrong, but those are
Yeah.
the early stages of doing that.
Do you feel like that time by the fire helped you like to the point of discernment of the priesthood? Or how did that impact your faith, really? Because, yeah.
Hmm. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying because I know that you said that you're not really taking it as a time of like adoration or prayer, right? You're just
Hmm.
having this stillness. But I'm
Hmm.
assuming
Hmm.
that if you're having this stillness, I'm sure the questions of life are coming to your head, right?
Right.
While you're sitting
Right.
there. So where did
Right.
that lead you? Where did that lead you next?
Hmm. Yeah, I heard, I think it was Father Boniface Hicks, or he recently gave the image of the ocean. If the ocean is really agitated, then sound can't travel over it. But if the ocean is still, the water's flat, then sound can travel over it and travel a great distance. And so that I think that's a helpful analogy to understand what happens if we're able to be still and be in silence, and especially to cultivate that habit over time, is that the sound that's coming from God, the God is constantly speaking to us, and not necessarily speaking words of like do this or do that, but speaking the word, speaking His Son, speaking Jesus to us. God is constantly doing that. We are not always disposed to hearing that because the ocean is so agitated. And so I think that began to happen there. And I was also, like, as we've talked about, starting to study more into the faith and listen to Catholic radio and read books and pray the rosary and have conversations with other priests. And so all of this together led to not only a deeper and deeper relationship with God and a stronger desire to pursue that more and more, but then eventually to, okay, I think the next stage is to apply it. The next stage as far as what am I going to do with my life, right? Because these are kind of separate questions, and of course they have lots of touch points, but they're two separate questions. Like, what does it look like to develop my relationship with God? What does it look like to get to know Him, to develop an intimacy with Him? That's one question. The other question is, what am I going to do with my life?
Right.
And I was, 24, 25, 26, 27 years old at this during this period. And so I was at a crossroads and I wanted to get going, whether to get going to the seminary, into the priesthood, or to get going into marriage and family life. And so there was something of an urgency, as a pressing matter to pursue that question as well. What am I going to do with my life? And so those things were happening concurrently. And the conversations with Father Vogel led me to make retreats at the seminary. And eventually I said, yes, I will apply and
But how
begin
did you
kind of
even
this. Mhm,
how did you even get to Father Vogel? I mean, what was the because like and maybe this is just me, but I was
mhm,
always basically I was always like, yeah, marriage. Like
mhm,
never be a nun. No, thank you.
mhm,
And then there was like a period in time where I discerned. And again, it was like, okay, gave it a good college try. Not for me,
mhm,
you know?
mhm,
Um, so it's like for me, and I think many people that aren't exposed to maybe more than just every Sunday, their priest every Sunday. Or if
mhm,
they don't have nuns teaching at their school, or they don't have brothers that they're encountering in the world, right?
mhm,
Like, what leads you to even see that as another vocation? So I guess at this point, like my question would be is like, how did you even get to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to at least pursue this and see if a door is going to open? Or like
mhm,
how'd you even reach out to Father Vogel, I guess, at this point?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are good questions, and I don't fully understand how it all happened, but some things that seem to have played their part was one thing I mentioned already, that my sister kind of planted that seed early on. So
Yeah.
that was always kind of, not always, but that came back. That was in the background, and that would frequently come to the foreground. But then while in Arco, one little moment that I remember explicitly was I would often go to the church to pray, and there was a little booklet in the, how churches will have little tables with various materials of prayer at the entrance, and one of them was a Rosary for Vocations booklet. And so I would often go and pray that, and it just had little meditations for each mystery, and it might have even have like a line for each Hail Mary, maybe, or I'm not sure, don't remember exactly. But I'd pray that rosary regularly for vocations, and for vocations, like for an increase of vocations to the priesthood and religious life. That was kind of
Mm.
the purpose of the book, and maybe even just for the priesthood. But I remember there was a line in one of the little meditations was, "Send, O Lord, holy apostles to your church," and this would be repeated at the end of each mystery, at the end of each one of those meditations. And I must have prayed that dozens of times. But then there was one time when I said that, and then immediately the question came, could that be me?
Oh.
Like, am I praying for one of those? I'm praying for the holy apostles to be sent to the church. Could I be one of the holy apostles? Certainly not holy. But could I be one of the people that God's going to send to the church to,
Yeah.
to answer this call? And then Father Chase came, and when I was first there, it was Father Paul Wonder and Father Everest Shio. But then they were transferred, and Father Chase came. I think he had just come. I think it was his first assignment as pastor, and he was there for a year or two, and maybe just a year or two, yeah, a year or two before I went to seminary, and then he was there for longer. But then he moved on. He went back to Rome to finish his degree, and then he went to St. Augustine's at U of I.
Hmm.
But he was just a couple of years older than me, and much wiser, much more mature, much more virtuous, but really kind of my age, kind of my peer. And he took me under his wings and spent a lot of time with me and taught me to pray the Liturgy of the Hours and was always available for a phone call. I'd often call him and ask questions and talk through things. And there's a whole other chapter here. I've been deliberating as to whether introduce it or not. Maybe I'll just say it and then we probably don't have time to go into it, but maybe some other time. That um, I'd been dating somebody during this period,
Oh,
and
really?
so that was a whole other situation there, and Father Chase really helped me through that. And
So you obviously had your heart knew that there was a call there to the priesthood then. You'd have to, or else like yeah, I'm just thinking like if you had a relationship, then it really had to be written on your heart. You know what I mean? For you to continue to
yeah,
prescribe, to pursue it.
yeah, this is a big question, and did God predetermine that I'd be a priest before I was born or at my conception? It's certainly possible. But on the other hand, let's suppose in this alternative parallel universe that I had chosen to marry this wonderful young woman, this virtuous, wonderful woman that I was courting at the time. eh, Would would I have let God down, or would I be living in plan B? I think not. I think God is always present. God is always plan A, and that's always available.
Yeah.
And and also, um, I heard this from Father Mike Schmitz one time, and it really resonated with me that he was saying that he also had, somebody that he was considering marrying, and he obviously chose not to. And he said, but it's not like she was just this character in my story that, then she ceased to be the character. It's like, no, it's like she's the main character in her story. And, not to say anything about like Christ is really the main character. We're all just participating in Christ's story. But as far as she goes, like she's the main character. So it's like I came into her life and we had this period where we were considering marriage and it was very intentional. We weren't just like flippantly dating. We were in a courtship and we met in church and we spent a lot of time with her brother or her yeah, brother and sister-in-law and their children and her parents and um but it was geared towards this question like are we going to marry each other and have a family? And I told her early on and I think, hindsight's always 2020. I probably would have done things differently with more information. But at the time, I told her, I'm considering the priesthood and I'm open to marriage. And we talked to our priest at the time, who it was not Further Chase, but we talked to our priest and we're encouraged to court each other and see where it would lead. And so long story short, long answer short to your question, I think I could have said yes to her, yes to marrying her and having a family with her, and that would have been beautiful, and God would bless that.
Yeah.
But there was whether it's a call or whether it's a desire or um, an attraction or a growing understanding. A big thing was at this point I started to study the Mass, reading the Lamb's Supper, and so reading and listening to talks by Scott Hahn and Michael Barber and Brand Petrie, all these guys really talking about the Mass and confession, and just growing in a small way, growing in an understanding of how indispensable these things are, and grow and realizing the stark shortage of priests everywhere. And but not just that, not just like as a matter of utility, like, oh, there's a shortage of priests, so I better go fill that hole. But more like the relationship that the priest has with Christ is a unique one because yes, we're all baptized into the priesthood of Christ. There's the priesthood of the baptized, but the ministerial priesthood is more closely configured to Christ the priest, who offers his life in sacrifice back to the Father And there is this unity that is offered to the priest via holy orders. And so it's first of all for the priest, it's first of all for his relationship with God and for his intimacy with the Trinity.
Yeah.
And as I was just beginning to touch this, beginning to discover it, I just found myself wanting it more and more.
Yeah.
And so eventually I had to make a decision, and I went to the seminary, made a retreat at the seminary. And when I came back, I told my girlfriend slash fiance, we weren't officially engaged, but we were the whole time
It
we were
was
headed in that
intentional.
direction.
Yeah.
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 So I told her, yeah, I think I have to do this. I have to go to seminary. And that was hard. That was really hard.
So then when you go to the seminary, what did, yeah, what happens next? So you enter and you went to um Mount Angel, right?
I did for theology, yeah, but first I went to Mundelein Seminary in Chicago for pre-theology, so philosophy studies. So I
Yeah.
was there for 2 years. Then I went to Mount Angel for 2 years. Then I was in the diocese for 3 years. Then I returned to Mount Angel for 2 years. That was my
Beautiful.
journey.
I know a little bit more than the listeners, so I'll just start with when you went and stayed with the brothers for a short
Mm,
period of time, did you find it easier to go into that deeper level of prayer because of the time you had at the fire? Because
mm,
you had already made space, or you'd already practiced that space?
hmm.
Do you think that staying with them helped you, or even in the seminary, did that help you, or did those moments help you moving forward, do you think?
I think it's all been building upon, the previous stage. I mean, first of all, I'm very much a beginner in prayer, and I really mean that. I'm not just saying that, out of some sort of false humility or something, but I really am just, yeah, just beginning to touch kind of this or discover these deeper dynamics of prayer, how God is really drawing me personally into himself, like into his heart. Um, but my time at the ranch and sitting in front of that fire, that began 11 years ago, 13 years ago. Yeah, 2011, so 13 years ago. Then I went to seminary in 2014, and then I had a few years in seminary from 2014 until 2020. And in seminary, there's a lot on prayer, daily holy hours and conferences and retreats. And so doing that over the years. And then I went and spent 6 months with the Verbum Spey brothers in Boise. And those guys are the pros, they're the masters. And they're in silence in front of the Eucharist 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours a day, every single day. And so I definitely was able to receive a lot from them. Certainly not a lot as much as I could have. Even during my time there, I was still struggling with distractions of things going on in the world and things going on in my life, and even kind of where was my life going? Was I going back to seminary? Was I not? And those things, I know how difficult it can be to just focus on God when there are these, you know, big decisions that we have to make in our lives. And um,
I think
so
it's
I don't know if that answered your
doubly,
question yet, but
yeah, it's
mhm,
doubly hard though, because when it comes to a vocation, whether that's marriage or the priesthood or religious life, it's it's weird because you want to follow God's will, but then you're like, at least for myself, I'm like, well, am I just wanting this?
mhm,
Or is this God's will? Or like, is he really actually calling me to this? But yeah, it's hard because you want to focus and you want to do his will, but like
mhm,
kind of chiseling away at that desire to see if it's yours or his is, I
mhm,
think, an
mhm,
interesting part of that journey.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and of course, there's no easy answer to that. I surely wish that there was, and things would have been a lot easier during seminary if there was a simple formula. And that's a big question. There are lots of different schools of thought. I actually ended up writing my MA thesis around this topic, vocational discernment, and kind of choosing a state in life. And I just kind of looked at St. Ignatius of Loyola and in his spiritual exercises. He has some principles for choosing a state in life, he calls it, some principles for decision making in regards to making that decision. How am I going to, what, in which state of life am I going to spend my life? And he has some really sound principles for that. But that's such a difficult thing, and I really empathize with anyone who's struggling with navigating those waters. And I do try to, at least when appropriate, try to differentiate decision making. I have to make a decision whether small or big. I have to decide what to do this week, or whether to go to this event or not, or what topic to talk about in this mass or what have you, or in this ministry, or whatever the small decision is, or a big decision, right? To go into the priesthood, to go into a religious order, to go into married life. This kind of these things, I call them decision making. And then there's another category, which is something like God is drawing me to himself, and there are things that are helping me to be drawn to him and to respond to his call into himself. Not not right now, not right now talking about his call into priesthood or religious life or married life, but rather his call to himself. There are things that are facilitating that, and there are things that are preventing me from being drawn into him. And then can I discern that? Can I discern what's helping and what's inhibiting? And
Hmm.
if I can discern it, then I can accept the ones that are helping and I can reject the ones that are inhibiting. And
Yeah.
this is, I think, what Ignatius means, more focusedly when he talks about discernment of spirits,
Yeah.
to try to discern what these spirits are in us and how are they influencing us. Um, but all of that is unfortunately very complicated because of our the fall and because of our attachments. Like you said, our desires are they can be good, they can be holy, but they can also be self-centered. And so if I think that I'm being called to something, am I really being called? Is it really God who's drawing me there? Or
Hmm.
is it am I just acting out of my attachments and things?
So I'm going to apply kind of what you said and some thoughts I have to a scenario. So when you're talking, I think, you know, oh, this is really beautiful. I've had another conversation with someone as well that they said that they had this really long, like 8 years that it took them to discern what point or where they were going to go, right? And I think it's beautiful in this because, at least in their story, they said they had enough opportunities to kind of experience what they thought they wanted and then realize that that wasn't like fulfilling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in my head, I'm like, oh, I wonder if married people should do that. But the reality is it's like so different when it comes to the um that discernment process in marriage. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think if you look statistically, which statistics aren't perfect, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like people with shorter engagements
Mm-hmm.
actually have like a longer outcome
Mm-hmm.
than people with longer engagements.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like
Mm-hmm.
a sweet spot in terms of engagement and I think it's like 1 to 2 years versus like anything over like 2 years. I'm roughly quoting this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have a higher likelihood of divorce afterward, which is really
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Or the
Mm-hmm.
more that you pretend to be in your vocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
or like
Mm-hmm.
pretend to be married with the other person. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of interesting because I was thinking, oh, like maybe people should like really have long engagements, but then like statistically speaking, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't
Mm-hmm.
actually work out.
Yeah,
So,
no, that makes
interesting.
sense. Yeah, I mean, there's no magic formula probably, but there's a period, especially if a young couple is practicing chastity during their dating phase, then they're less likely to be so distracted by their emotions, by their
Yeah,
emotional attachments that
absolutely.
are formed if a couple is not practicing chastity. But so if that couple is and they're doing, proper Christian courtship, then what is the period? Maybe after 6 months, 9 months, they know each other pretty well already, and they know at this point if they're compatible with each other or not. and if they, um, you know, they know not only their strengths and their common ground, but they also know each other's weaknesses and each other's
Yeah.
struggles, even each other's vices and areas of habitual sin, and whether grave or not. But now they know each other at these levels, and not entirely, obviously, because they won't until they start living together. But they know it to such a sufficient degree that they can then make a decision like, okay, let's let's commit to each other for life, and let's commit to seeking God together, to receiving God's love together, to loving each other, to also helping each other through our struggles and through our weaknesses. And we're going to commit to this for the rest of our lives. So now they enter this period of engagement, which is really, preparation for marriage, as far as um, yeah, getting to know each other a little bit of a deeper level, but really getting ready to get married so that they can then start living a marital life, a communal life, and living under the same house, and then really doing what they've committed themselves to do. But now this is a choice. They've committed to each other to do this for the rest of their lives. I think this is a, I think this is a healthier and also a more practical, but also a more, yeah, just a more spiritually sound perspective than the perspective. Correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, but based on your experience, but the perspective of, I have to discern whether God is communicating to me somehow by my interior movements or by some sort of external sign that this is the person that he wants me to marry. And
Mm.
that if I do that process incorrectly, then God is going to be upset with me. And if I
Yeah.
do that process correctly, then he's going to reward me. That seems to be a kind of a misguided way of approaching that. But what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that and I don't want to take too long on this because I want to go back to your
Hmm.
experience at seminary, but yeah, I think that it can be hard, especially on women, I think, because you're, kind of fed through your childhood um that there's a soulmate out there for you,
Mm, mm,
right?
mhm,
But that's like so it's hard to talk about because in one point you're like, yeah, I think God does have someone that like I think that God is going to bless your union, right? And
mhm,
so there is
mhm,
this like part where God is pointing you towards that. I don't know. Yeah.
mhm,
It feels
mhm,
in a way that there's someone that once you meet them, you're like, "Oh, I know."
mhm,
I've
mhm,
talked to a lot of couples and most of
mhm,
them in my like very limited questionnaire that I've
mhm,
put on
mhm,
there. But a
mhm,
lot of people say that they met the person and they were fairly convinced shortly that they knew this was the right person,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so there's the part of me that's like, well, yeah, there's there's a difference. Like when you meet your
mhm,
spouse, there's a difference than all the other
mhm,
people you've dated before.
mhm, mhm,
And I think God gives you grace in that. But at the same time, it's also you have to remember that part of it is to choose,
mhm,
right? And part of it is to choose and to commit. And in
mhm,
that way there isn't like a soulmate kind of thing.
mhm. And what was your perspective? Did you have one instead of the other, or is it a combination of all of the above?
God had brought me to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get married. Like I've discerned being a religious and was not my cup of tea, brought me a lot of anxiety.
Mhm,
Um, and I can't be in the priesthood, so obviously it's like single or married.
mhm,
Um, so when I met Aaron, I think the point that I knew that I would get married to him was I remember previously whenever I would f argue with like a boyfriend in the past, I would feel like, oh my gosh, like he's gonna leave me. I'm like obviously like we're not solid enough that this is gonna work. And I remember we had a really big argument and we almost did break up, but I had this peace that like, no, he's not gonna leave.
mhm,
He's staying. Like
mhm,
you don't have to worry about him leaving. He's not leaving.
mhm,
And I
mhm,
really think that it was from God because I usually was super nervous about
mhm,
those
mhm,
things.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and always like I have a lot of insecurities with that
mhm,
like I'm
mhm,
not good enough.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and there was just like this internal peace, like, no, you don't have to
mhm,
worry about this. He's not gonna
mhm,
leave you. Like he's gonna be here for you. He's gonna be your rock.
mhm,
And
mhm,
yeah, that was like, I don't know, 3 months into dating. And we were
Mm-hmm.
long distance. That
Mm-hmm.
was the other thing when you were talking about couples. We were long distance, so we really only for like the first 6 months that we dated, we were long distance, which
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
actually think is really beautiful because there's no like temptation of like
Mm-hmm.
physical, you know, anything. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all just emotional connection and trying to figure out the person and trying to decide like to meet them for who they are and
Mm-hmm.
make your
Mm-hmm.
decisions about those things. So I was
Mm-hmm.
really thankful that we were long distance as long as we were. I'm glad it
Mm-hmm.
was over when it was, but
Sure, sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I
yeah,
There's a lot that I would want to ask and keep digging into that, but it sounds
maybe
like you want to turn a corner. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we can do another interview and we
Okay.
can talk
Yeah.
we can have it flipped where you can interview and
Hmm.
be my
But can I
interview.
just highlight one thing that I think is really
Absolutely.
beautiful is just, yeah, that you recognizing in there the your insecurity right now. I'm walking carefully here because I know this is sacred ground, right? Your spiritual life and your relationship with God. And but yeah, your insecurity there about not being worthy and the anxiety that was bringing you about what Aaron was gonna do, and God just really coming to you and affirming you, like, no, you
Yeah.
are worthy, you are good, you are my daughter. If I can add words to what you said, you are my
Yeah.
daughter, and I'm here. I have you. You're not going anywhere. I'm not going. First of all, God's saying this to you, right? I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so now this provides the ground, the foundation. And I know this isn't exactly what you said. I'm maybe adding more. Feel free to correct me there. And then this provides the foundation for you to then relate to Aaron and be like, oh, okay, I don't need to be anxious about you leaving me because it's really not about me being unworthy. We have something here that we need to work out. And so let's work it out.
Yeah,
Does
absolutely.
that resonate, or am
Yeah.
I twisting that?
No, no, absolutely. I think even as a married couple, that's just never been a fear that I've had with him ever. It was like a
Mm,
really big gift that
mm,
God was
mm,
able to give me. I
mhm,
think
mhm,
sometimes now, like if we have arguments or we're not connecting how we should, sometimes I'll just get really sad and um like I remember one moment where I was just like, I feel like I'm alone, like you were on the cross. But I
mm,
never felt like God wasn't abandoning me, and I never thought that Aaron was
mm,
abandoning me. I just knew
mm,
that what I was experiencing was painful.
mm,
Does
mhm,
that make
mhm.
sense? Where it was like,
Yes.
obviously we have something to work on, but I'm not afraid of you leaving, and I'm not afraid of leaving God, right? Like
Mhm,
I'm taking
mhm,
it to the cross. I think that
mhm.
was another really powerful moment that I had in our relationship. But yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for
We should
sharing.
probably, yeah, we can do a whole nother podcast and you can interview
Hmm.
me. That'd be fun.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay, but going back to the seminary. So you did 8 years and then you went to the brothers. So I guess in that period, is that just how long seminary is? Or what does that seminary entail? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot there, lots of twists and turns in my seminary journey. So first, when I applied to enter seminary for the Diocese of Boise, we had a seminarian at Mundelein, which is outside of Chicago. And that was a kind of an unusual situation. He was there by himself. So they were looking for somebody to go out there with him.
Where is
And
that?
so that just outside of Chicago,
Oh,
in
okay.
the town called Mundelein. And also the seminary is called Mundelein Seminary, just north of Chicago. At the time, now Bishop Barron was the rector. He was Father Robert Barron. He was the president rector of the seminary. And I applied to the Diocese of Boise, and then they sent me there. So I went to Mundelein for what's called pre-theology, which is 2 years of philosophy. And so I had Father Barron as rector for the first year, and then that was when he was nominated auxiliary bishop of Los Angeles. So after my first year there, he moved, and I stayed for the second year. But then during my second year of pre-theology, the other seminarian who was there, he was asked to leave the seminary. So then I was there by myself, and I was finishing pre-theology. So now the diocese and really the bishop had to decide whether to send someone else to be there with me or to bring me to Mount Angel. And they chose the latter. So in 2016, I was transferred to Mount Angel for theology studies, and that's outside of Portland.
So you
Go ahead.
had Bishop Barron as your Was he a teacher? So like was he teaching you your theology classes?
He was still a professor of theology, so I never had him. I was there studying philosophy, but he was the president rector, so kind of like the president or the principal of the seminary.
Did you get
Yeah.
to meet with him much?
A little bit, yeah. He was very present to the community. This is something that I was really surprised by because at the time he was already getting pretty famous. He had his Catholicism series and his YouTube channel,
Mhm.
but his primary job was really being the president rector of Mundelein. And so he always sat at the cafeteria at lunch. He never had lunch appointments, just about never. So he always just kind of sat at a different table with the seminarians and just chit chatted with seminarians. He was always present, like walking around campus, and he was accessible in his office. So he was very pastoral. I was really surprised by that and edified by that. It was really more like like on the weekends and on Fridays, sometimes he would be gone. He'd go away, give a talk, and then during breaks, like Christmas breaks and Easter breaks, he would record various things. So he definitely prioritized his role in Mundelein, which for me it is still an area that I think about often because this is really the first role of the priest, right? Is to be present
Yeah.
to his community, to his people, to his assignment, to his parish, to his family, and it's not like one can't do evangelization things or media things, and we're doing this now, and hopefully, praise God, it will be fruitful. But really, there is the temptation, and I see it in myself, of being distracted by that and prioritizing that at the cost of neglecting our primary duties and responsibilities. And I often think like if Bishop Barron was able to do that and still prioritize his role as a pastor to the seminary community, there's no reason why I shouldn't, why I can't. And so that's always yeah, an example that he left for me of, okay, yeah, go out, spread the gospel, but don't forget your own parish.
Do priests typically have spiritual advisors to like help with their continual formation after
Sure.
the priesthood or after the
Yes.
seminary?
Hmm. Yeah. We have our pastors, we have older mentors, we have, and I'm blessed to have several of those. Uh, we're supposed to have a spiritual director, which can be hard, especially in a rural diocese like ours, to have somebody to meet with on a regular basis. And then the formation that we received at the seminary is certainly not conclusive, right?
Hmm.
They call commencement, right? When you finish a degree, that's called commencement. It's the beginning. That's what that word means. So it's like you're just beginning to be formed, or when that's true academically, but it's also true spiritually and in the human formation and pastoral formation. So we're definitely still being formed. We had a director of formation at Mundelein, Dr. Wilkes, Dr. Kate Wilkes. She said, just remember, you're never going to be a done muffin. Okay, Dr. Wilkes. Thank you.
A done muffin.
Yeah,
That's really funny. So, I
always
mean,
information.
do you feel like you have pressure as a priest now then that people look up to you in a certain way and you're still working on your own path? I mean, if that's correct.
Hmm, good question. Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is I don't think anyone looks up to me yet. I'm just a lowly associate priest, just 1 year out of seminary. There's a saying in the seminary, once as a seminarian, there's nothing you can do that, people will always love you no matter what. Same thing as an associate, same thing, or same thing as a transitional deacon, and same thing as an associate pastor or a parochial vicar. But then once you become a pastor, it flips. Doesn't matter what you do, people will always,
Yeah.
be sad or disappointed or mad. So no, I don't think anybody looks up to me yet. But as far as like, is there pressure? I think um, one thing that I'm grateful for is seminary was really hard. It was really, really hard on multiple levels. And one thing that it forced me to do was it forced me to be very honest and accepting of my own brokenness,
Mm.
my own
Yeah.
sinfulness, my own woundedness. And that has allowed me, and not perfectly, certainly, but that has allowed me to um, not think that I need to be on a pedestal. It's like I'm under no pretense. Like I'm the biggest sinner in the room, like in any room that I'm in. And so I don't need to pretend that I'm not, I don't need to pretend that I have it all together. And as I say that, I recognize like, well, but sometimes I do try to pretend, like I do fall into that. Do fall to that error of like, oh, I have to pretend like I have it all together. Otherwise, this person won't accept me or they won't receive what I'm saying or what have you. Um, but I guess the difference is like, first of all, it doesn't have, it's not the norm. It's not the constant like modus operandi, they say. But more than that, like I'm able to catch it more readily. When is the whole discernment of spirits thing. It's like that's an exercise of discernment of spirits. Am I doing X because I'm insecure and I want other people to think well of me, or or am I doing this like in freedom, and am I just being authentic and this is who I am, and
Hmm.
I'm expressing myself and God's love for me and God's love for others in an authentic way. I think I because of the struggles in seminary, thanks be to God, I've been able to notice those movements more readily. And so long way of saying I don't feel as much of that pressure. Like if somebody wants to tell me like, hey, you're not doing as well of a job as you could be doing, I'm not surprised by that anymore.
Mm.
It's like I don't need to be defensive about that. It's like, well, yeah, yes, of course I'm not. Like I certainly know I'm not. And so please tell me how can I improve, or how can I serve you better, or what have you. But I say all of that not knowing what it's like to be a pastor. So we'll see. Ask me again in a few years.
Sure. So then going through seminary, but what were the hard decisions that you had going through seminary you think others would benefit that might be either just starting the seminary or thinking about going into the seminary or
Hmm.
those kind of things?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, the bishop had to come up with the hardest punishment for me. So he sent me to live with the brothers for a few months. That was, I hope the brothers, I hope Father Dominique hears this someday and knows that that was my punishment.
What a punishment. That's
Yeah,
like the best punishment you want. It's like
it's true. It's true. Yeah. Gosh. So I guess I'll just start talking and then we'll see where this goes. So the the decision to go to the brothers was first of all the bishops. And there's a couple chapters leading up to that. I at Mount Angel, I so as I said, I did 2 years of Mundelein, then I transferred to Mount Angel, did 2 years of Mount Angel first, and then pastoral year, and then there was this break, and then I came back for two and a half more years. So after the initial 2 years of Mount Angel, I was having a really hard time with the seminary, hard time with the church at large. This was 2018, so that was when the sex abuse crisis, the more recent one, was exposed. So Cardinal McCarrick and that whole situation, and I went I went on pastoral year, which is regularly scheduled, and I did that for a year. And during that year, the seminary was evaluating me as to whether they thought I was fit to continue in formation. There's a little tangent, and this is part of our conversation about discernment. Never once did the seminary ask me whether I thought I was called by God to be a priest.
Mm.
I think there's an important like data point in that whole field. The seminary is not so much interested in that. Seminary is interested in whether the candidate is fit for the priesthood, is fit for priestly ministry. And that was during that year, or during my first 2 years, and then during my pastoral year, they had come to the conclusion that I wasn't, that I was, I potentially fit, I potentially had, the skills and the aptitude and the disposition to be a priest, but I was not displaying them. I was not exemplifying them. I was not open to formation. I was not respectful of professors and of formators. And they saw all of these things as signs that I would not be a respectful associate. I would not, be able to work well with people and be an effective minister and be a bridge to the people of God. And so they decided that that I was not to be welcomed back for theology 3 and theology 4. And so the bishop wanted to continue to work with me, and he decided to have me stay in the diocese for a year and have me just do spiritual formation and counseling and do a tiny bit of ministry, do some physical labor. I really kind of a novitiate year in the diocese, but really just get some more time. But and the main things were counseling and spiritual direction. And so I went to live up in North Idaho, and I did that for a year, and the diocese was very generous. And Father Chase Hassenroll up in at St. Augustine's was my mentor and housed me in these things. And I did spiritual direction and counseling twice a month. And at the end of that year, I there's a lot to be said here, but I won't go into all the details. But at the end of that year, I asked if I could stay, and the bishop was pleased with my progress, but he was still kind of skeptical as to whether I was ready to return to seminary. And so he said, "Yes, we'd love for you to stay in the diocese. We'd love you. We want to continue to work with you and see, whether you can become a priest here and these things. But let's not go back to seminary yet. Let's do one more year in the diocese, and let's have you live with the brothers." And so that's how that came about. And so I went, and I was supposed to be with them for a year. And after a few months, Father Dominique, gosh, I was joking about him earlier about punishment, but he's been, yeah, one of the biggest gifts in my life. And um, yeah, I mean, I don't like canonizing people, but he probably, yeah,
Don't worry, I
he's
would
a
agree
very
with
holy
you.
man. Yeah, he's a very holy man. But learned a lot from him, and he was just so loving, so fatherly. Like he really took me under his wings, and he had no need to, and there was never, I mean, sometimes we joked about it, um, and I entertained the question about entering their order, but that wasn't why I was there. I wasn't there to discern to enter their order or not. I was there because my bishop, who was my superior, basically asked Father Dominique, who's their superior, if Father Dominique would guide me and help me to unpack some um, underlying issues that had begun to be unpacked over the previous couple of years, especially over the previous few months through counseling and spiritual direction. And Father Dominic said yes, just really out of generosity and reciprocity for being allowed to be in the diocese and to minister in the diocese and so forth, but under no pretense that he was recruiting me into his order. And so it was just, yeah, it was just a really wonderful situation. And it was really hard because those guys, they're the real deal. They pray and they work and they study all day long. And I had and have all of my attachments and worldly distractions and things. And some of that began to be purified during my time there. But for after a few months, Father Dominique came and asked, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I don't know, because the bishop told me to." And he said, "Yeah, but really, why are you here?" And I said, "That's it." He said, "Okay, well, I don't think you need to be here." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll go tell the bishop." He said, "Okay, I will." And so he went and told the bishop, said, "Nelson doesn't need to be here. He's ready to go to seminary." And the bishop said, "Okay." I take your word for it. I mean, I'm sure they had a longer conversation about it, but um,
They did it over text, don't worry.
yeah,
Just kidding.
um, that's true, probably. But then the bishop said, "Well, let's call Mount Angel and see." And Mount Angel had said no, 2 years earlier. He said basically we're done with him. But then so they called Mount Angel and said, "Let's what do you guys think about this? He's been doing all this work and counseling and spiritual direction, and he's been living with a religious order for a few months, and good reports from the superior." And so Abbot Jeremy enters the picture. Abbot Jeremy is the abbot of Mount Angel Monastery and also the chancellor of the seminary. So not directly in charge of the seminary, but very influential. And he had been a father figure to me while I was at my first 2 years at the seminary, in part because he wasn't directly associated with formation. He was more kind of on the side, kind of like as an uncle, I guess. But he and I had um, spent a lot of time together through classes and through private conversations and things. And so Abba Jeremy agreed. He said, "Okay, yeah, I'd love for him to come back here, and I would do my part to to look out for him and to help him." And Abba Jeremy is from Idaho originally, so he's always kind of had an affinity to boys as seminarians. And and then the last step was to ask the bishop or the president rector of the seminary, and they asked him, and this was right at the peak of COVID, and they had all sorts of things on their
Mm.
plates, and they said, you know, um, we're open to this, but not right now. There's just too much going on. Let's wait 6 months, maybe at the halfway through the year. And so then I stayed with the brothers for a few more months, which was a gift. And then midway through that year, I did more like I basically had to reapply to the seminary and go through the application process. Um, but then they accepted me, and then I finished that year just kind of as on a probationary period, and then finished theology 3 and 4, which was the last 2 years of studies that I was that I was still missing. So yeah, thanks for asking that again. I've never really, I don't think, told that whole story. So
How did your
hopefully,
how did
mhm.
your family receive your entrance into the seminary, and then once you finished, were they able to be there with you for your ordination?
Yeah, yeah. So that you ask good questions, Natalie. These are insightful, insightful. Yeah. So lots of different layers to this question. The yeah. So my father died when I was young. I was just a baby. My mother um, has been Catholic her whole life and encouraging. She was very surprised when I started thinking about seminary, but encouraging and happy that I went to seminary. Um, they're pretty distant. I mean, she lives in Ohio. Now I have a brother in Ohio and I have other cousins in Ohio. But um, yeah, I think, our story is still being written. There's still knots, there's still tensions, and there's still wounds, and God is still working through it all and redeeming it all and restoring it all. Um, but the story is still very, very much still being written. Um, I think it was very confusing for everyone when I was basically in and out of seminary for a bit. I think different people, um, yeah, I think it was confusing and folks didn't know how to support me or what was going on exactly, how to be present, how to be encouraging, and how to better understand the situation. And and then also, you know, there was some real work that I was doing as, some real psychological work of like uncovering unhealed trauma and deeper wounds and um, unresolved issues and unresolved, family of origin issues that had been present my whole life, but it had been being expressed in different ways, and I didn't know that they were connected with these deeper things. And so now that I was doing all this work, I was facing them for the first time, and trying to navigate like both being loving and failing at doing that much of the time, if not most of the time, while navigating doing that while at the same time like being honest and being real with the hurt that I was carrying that I had been carrying my whole life. And so that's all just very difficult. And my my mother and my brother and a couple of cousins came out to Boise for my ordination,
Oh, that's
which I was very
awesome.
grateful for. And actually, one of my aunts who lives in Brazil, my mom's only sister, um, she came she came all the way from Brazil to my ordination, which was really special. And um, I just a couple of months ago went to Ohio for the first time and got to see the rest of my cousins that I hadn't seen in a while. And so yes, yeah. So I think short answer to your question is yes. Like everyone's supportive. Not everyone understands, and we're all trying to do our best and navigate um, differences of relationships and worldviews and
Yeah.
understandings of past, present, and future. And it's all
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah. Um, One of the other questions I had for you when you were talking was you talked about, the spiritual formation and then also having counseling. I think people can think that they don't need counseling because counseling is like a new age
Mm.
thing, and that what they need is just to go to confession and to just pray more. I
Hmm.
think it's kind of like yeah, I'll just leave it there. And then on the other hand, I see people that almost neglect the spiritual life
Hmm.
because they're like, oh, well, I'm getting the counseling and this is really good and it's healing a lot of things and they almost put that over God. So I think having experience with that, both sides obviously you're doing counseling and spiritual direction, right? What would you say to either of those or how would you address either of those?
Hmm. Yeah. First thing I'd say is that they're fair concerns and they're fair, um, yeah, they're understandable approaches and ways to try to navigate these very difficult waters. And especially so, for taking one at a time, I think, psychology as an academic field, precisely delineated from other academic fields, is fairly recent. I think, they say Sigmund Freud was the father of psychology, and I think it was in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And so that's very recent. And I think there, especially, Catholic Church is very old and Catholic tradition is very old. And if we're grounded in the tradition, and especially if we're concerned about ways that the church is going and the world is going, then it's a very understandable concern to it's a very understandable connection to connect, problems in the world with psychology, and psychologists being one more example of problems in the modern world. Um, I think we can balance that with maybe broadening our understanding of psychology. Psychology is not just a academic field delineated from other academic fields. Psychology literally means the study of the soul. That's what that word means.
Mm.
And we can say, that is what Catholicism is. Catholicism is the study of the soul and the healing of the soul. That is Jesus's ministry, is the healing of the soul, the healing of the person. And that's what healing means. That's what salvation means. Salvation means healing. Those are the same words. What is it? Salud in Spanish. Is health. Savior. Um, Health. Savior, of course, means to say. I've talked about this before, but now you put me on the spot, and I'm jumbling everything up.
That's
But
okay.
I go back to the prayer at the end of the rosary. It's let us pray. O God, whose only begotten Son, by his life, death, and resurrection, has purchased for us the rewards of eternal. What do you say?
Life.
Life. Some people say salvation. These are two different versions, right?
Oh,
Eternal life, eternal salvation. That's because they come from salutis, if I'm not mistaken, in the Latin, which is translated to both of those words, life and salvation.
Mm.
Life, salvation, and then we have salve, like healing salve. That salve has that same root. We can see it of salvation, or the Savior is the Salvator. He's the one that brings the salve, that brings the healing. And so I think an erroneous understanding of what salvation means, like Jesus comes to save me, would be like Jesus comes to fish me out of this pond that's murky, that's dirty, and fish me into heaven, which is clean. That's not quite right. It's more like, no, Jesus, the Salvator, he comes to bring me salvation, healing, life, and restoration, right? To restore. So all these things are kind of the associated concepts to restore me into the person that he first made me to be, into a saint. The saint is the healed person. And so as he's doing this on earth, then he brings me to heaven. And so this kind of process is carried out for all of eternity. I think that's a healthier, pun intended, understanding of salvation. And so, what does this have to do with psychology? Well, yeah, if psychology and counseling and therapy is ordered towards my own personal fulfillment or my own um, what is it, self-actualization, they say, or good feelings, right? I'm just meant to have good feelings all the time, my well-being in the sense of having good feelings. If that's what psychology is, which that is what it kind of is in the secular world,
Yeah.
then we would understandably want to push that aside because the Catholic Christian perspective of the human person is much bigger than just having good feelings, right? And we're actually made to be saints and to like live a life of love and reciprocity and communion. But if psychology is ordered towards this end of healing and restoration and sanctification and salvation, which it is also from a Catholic perspective, so that's when good Catholic psychology can be brought in, then that can correct and that can dispel all of those concerns about counseling and so forth. So maybe you know that's it as far as psychology. But then yeah, it's not enough. See, it's kind of an arbitrary um, bifurcation to say counseling on one side and prayer on the other side.
Right.
It's like these things are so intrinsically connected. They're if we understand psychology to be the study and the healing of the human person, and we understand Catholicism to be the study and the healing of the human person, then we can see that these two things are so integrated. It's like I go to prayer not to just recite words that have been written by other people. I'm not mocking that. Obviously, that has its place. But I go to prayer to receive God's love. God's love is not meant to just stay at the surface. God's love is meant to reach me into the depth of my being, into the depth of my soul, and to heal my soul as it's touching me. And so if that's how I'm approaching prayer, whether it's reciting the rosary, meditating on the mysteries, going to mass, celebrating mass, going to adoration, being in silence, meditating on the scriptures, if that's how I'm approaching prayer, then there are going to be things that I'm going to need to talk about with somebody who is a good guide, somebody who can help me, even if somebody who can just listen to me. And that can be a friend, that can be a spiritual director, that can be a therapist, that can be a counselor, that can be a mentor. I sometimes wonder if what's most important is that there is somebody on the other side, another that I can relate this to,
Mm-hmm.
because,
Mm-hmm.
love God with your whole mind, heart, soul, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's like we can't just have this relationship with God, this deep, vulnerable, authentic, transparent relationship with God, without at the same time having this type of relationship with another. And so I have to be able to reveal this to another. But truth be told, as we all know, not everyone is good at receiving those things.
Yeah.
I've shared things with people who, just maybe due to no fault of their own, didn't know how to receive it, and they deflected it, or they um, accused, they were judgmental or what have you. They just didn't have the skills or the wherewithal or the background to be able to receive that. And so now, the the spiritual fruitfulness perhaps is like stillborn, like it hasn't
Yeah.
been communicated and um and shared with, communed with another person. And okay, well, good spiritual director hopefully can do that, and a good counselor can do that, and a good therapist can do that. And now this is happening with another person, which then also facilitates what is happening in prayer, in my meditation with the scriptures, in my silent adoration, in my recitation of the rosary, in my attending mass, and so forth. So these two things, there's very much an integration between these two things, and that
Hmm.
kind of dispels the errors of overemphasizing one side or the other, or of neglecting one side or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the part that I would add to that is I think the cat first I want to just say like I think the Catholic part of the therapy is really important because I actually did go when I was up in Sun Valley for a short period. I did go to some therapy and they were not Catholic. And even though I said I want to like work on these things, they're like, but do you really need to work on those? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I definitely need to work on those. Like
Mm-hmm.
I need
Mm-hmm.
to be working towards virtue, and your
Mm-hmm.
view of virtue and my view of virtue are just different. So that's the first thing. But sometimes it's hard to trust that you can tell someone what you
Mm-hmm.
need to tell them. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like confession in a way. Like we all
Mm-hmm.
hate going to confession, but after you admit and say something out loud and you know that no
Mm-hmm.
one like no one else is gonna hear it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but there's this part of like letting it go
Mm-hmm.
and actually telling someone and admitting to it and then
Mm-hmm.
correcting, making the situation right again, making the relationship right again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think in a way therapy can also do that with things that are not necessarily sinful. Like you said, like with trauma and stuff, there's a way like there can be a fear of like trying to admit that or tell that to someone and them
Mm-hmm.
not either knowing how to handle it or maybe their style is like me and they try to be a fixer. Oh, let me fix that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
they're someone that, might deflect it to be like, oh, that's not really, then, there's worse people off in the country, other
Mm-hmm.
places. So,
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I think there's a very important shift that is essential, which is the shift from having a fix it mentality to a love mentality.
mm,
There is obviously a time and a place to fix things and to solve problems, but even when it is at the time and the place to fix something, that can only happen within a context of love.
mhm,
And within the context of love, most of the time, I would guess, or much of the time at least, it isn't the time and the place to fix something.
yeah.
If the person, if and this can be the frustration, like for a young seminarian, like at first, like somebody who is just starting out in the spiritual life, like as an intentional disciple, we can say, somebody who has just become an intentional disciple. The first disposition maybe is going to be, I have these problems, fix them for me.
Mm,
And those can be internal or external problems. But I'm just coming to you, my spiritual mentor, whether that's a counselor or a spiritual director or parish priest, and I'm coming to you with these problems, and I would like you to fix them for me. Tell me what to do, tell me what to say, and then it's going to be fixed, and then I'll go on with my life. I think as we grow in the spiritual life, as we grow in our relationship with Christ, we start to shift away from that. and we start to shift into a disposition of, I am here to enter into communion with you, with the Lord and with you. We think about, for example, like a doctor. A doctor, we go to see a doctor for the doctor to fix, our health problem. And then once we're healed of that health problem, then we can go on and keep living our lives. So like the goal of seeing a doctor is to no longer need to see the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
That can't be our approach to God. Even if
Mm-hmm.
we say God is like a divine physician, Jesus is the divine physician, which is true, that analogy breaks down because if I really stretch the analogy, then I just want to come to Jesus for Jesus to heal me, and then I can go away from him. I can go
Yeah.
on living my life.
Yeah.
So that's not sufficient. It's a part of who Jesus is, but Jesus is also the bridegroom. So I want to come to Jesus, first of all, to be in relationship with him. As I'm in relationship with him, as my bridegroom, now we're in this context of love. And now he can exercise his healing ministry on me. And now I'm no longer rushed. I'm no longer like, just hurry up and fix me so I can get back to work. It's like, no, I'm already where I want to be, which is with you. And now that I'm with you, I'm disposed to receive the healing love that you wish to give me. From this place, then we can enter into similar types of relationships with other people. You know, Relationships of utility are fine. I do this for you, you do this for me. That's a part of friendship. But if that's all that our friendship is, that's going to be very limited.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it's like, now that I'm grounded in my relationship with God, now I can approach a relationship with you, not because I need something from you, but just because I want to be in communion with you. And now within this communion, we can help each other out. We can even help fix each other's problems, but that's not why we're here. And this also gets expressed in how folks approach counseling and approach spiritual direction.
Mm. I'm just thinking about my own life, I suppose,
Mm-hmm,
as you're
mm-hmm,
talking.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
it's interesting that you talk about the physician, right?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
we're supposed to go so that we don't see the doctor, right? Like an apple a
mm-hmm.
day keeps the doctor away.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we can have
Um,
that approach, right? A rosary a day keeps
yeah.
Jesus away. It's
Well,
like,
what I was thinking is I always noticed this about my own spiritual journey is that when I was in time of I would I would often ask when I was in Belmont Abbey, I'd often ask for times of suffering because after I experienced
mm,
Jesus and my suffering and
mm,
know that he can transform it, I would feel really close to him and then my
mm,
life would get better, right? And I'd be feeling great. And what I'd realize is I'd go further away from Christ again. And then I'd like almost want some suffering to come back because
mm,
I didn't know how to connect. And maybe it was more of an emotional connection at that
mm-hmm,
point than
mm-hmm,
like a true relationship, right?
mm-hmm,
But I would want to get back to a point where I was like suffering a little bit so that I could like call on him and try to have that relationship. So it was like almost the inverse, right? Where I'm
mm-hmm,
like trying
mm-hmm.
to hurt myself. So, I mean,
Mm,
not necessarily, not like
sure.
really, but like
Right. Right.
longing for that so that I can connect because I guess I didn't know how to connect in any other way. And I'm
Mm-hmm,
still very much growing in that, meaning like
mm-hmm,
I'm
mm-hmm,
like, yeah, very much trying to grow to the point where I can be connected with Jesus in a healthy way. And um I've never been great at reading scripture, but I'm reading scripture and I was instructed to read it in more of like a personal way. So like to focus on Christ and then focus on what he hates or what he loves or how
mm-hmm,
how he is and try to like understand him, you
mm-hmm,
know.
mm-hmm,
So, yeah, very much growing in that. But I was just thinking that when you were talking about the doctor part, it was just like
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's almost yeah, it's
Yeah, that's
very real,
beautiful.
I guess.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, once we get to that point of like knowing that God is with us while we're suffering, then to eradicate the suffering becomes less important.
Yeah.
It's like we can be with God in the suffering. And maybe, somebody some, maybe I can just recognize it myself, as you were sharing that, Natalie, I was thinking, okay, maybe I have an aversion in me towards what you're saying, where I want to look for suffering. Like, is that healthy? Did that,
I
is
don't
there
think it's healthy. I
no, no, no,
definitely
right.
don't think it's healthy.
Yeah. And I yeah, I'm not here critiquing what you're saying. I was just noticing my initial aversion. It's like, why, like, what is the resistance in me towards what you're saying? Towards What is the resistance in me towards this, um yeah, this deep connection with God while in suffering? And then if and it's not a big step, like it is the next logical step to say, well, if God is encountered in a more in a significantly meaningful way in the suffering, perhaps even more so than outside of suffering, then it would follow that I would want to seek suffering, right? So even before making a judgment about whether it's healthy or not, we can just acknowledge, like, yeah, that's the inclination I'm going to have if that's where I'm going to encounter God. And so is it healthy? And I'm not an expert here, of course. But is it or is it not? I don't know. My What I'm being attentive to right now is, like, I have a resistance towards encountering God in the suffering. I want to just be healed. Like, I just want to be fixed so that I don't have to rely on God, so that I can just go
Mm,
through my day without having to be dependent upon another, whether that's another person who has to provide for me because I can't provide for myself because I'm sick, or whether that's dependent on God, who ultimately can do that as no one else can.
yeah. I
Anyways.
think I think the reason why I would say that
Hmm.
it's unhealthy is because, at least in my case, it seems like my relationship with God is diminished completely in the joy, which is
Mm,
like backwards in that all of our joy comes from God. Like all of the
mm,
good things that we have come from God, and
mm,
we should fill in right relationship in that moment. And
mm,
for my previous experience, and I guess partly where I'm at now, it's like, no, I need to, you know, I don't know. It's so visceral in a way because it's like when I'm in pain, I think of the cross or I think of the scourging. That's
mm,
you can tell me about the cross all you want, but I watched The Passion of the Christ and what stuck with me was the scourging. That was
mm,
so
mm,
intense. But
mhm, mhm,
I can just think about Christ and in his pain and in his loneliness, and then I can just be like, you know how I'm feeling.
mm,
Like maybe no one else in the world does, but you know how I'm feeling.
mhm, mhm,
But the thing about it is like that's like staying in the passion and never getting to the resurrection. Like I feel like that's why it's not right. Like we're not supposed to stay in the passion. We're not supposed to stay with the death.
mhm,
We're like
mhm,
supposed to be in the resurrection with Christ and in the joy of the resurrection. And so
mhm,
I like
mhm,
really want to get to the point where I feel connected in a way that I do in my suffering. And maybe that it could be that I'm just too emotionally connected to it, right? Because you can feel
mhm,
it like a really strong emotion and then you can
mhm,
connect that. And
mhm,
maybe most of the time I feel happy and content. And content is not necessarily a really strong emotion.
mhm,
So maybe it might be a little bit of me being in my passions, but I would like to get to the point where I can be excited be excited and be in the resurrection like all the time.
mhm,
You know,
mhm,
I guess.
mhm,
I guess
mhm.
that's my initial thoughts after talking about. And
Yeah,
that's why I would say in my case, I don't think it's healthy for me to like
sure.
seek suffering because I'm not
Right.
I'm not getting past that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess, is there anything else that you'd like to, I guess, touch on? Because we're kind of
Yeah.
talking about, we're also
Hmm.
like, it's two part,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
I think this kind of points more into like the spiritual direction part versus
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
the actual dealing with the actual pain. But again, you're saying it's like the whole Christian person has to come together with, you have
Hmm.
to at least acknowledge your pain before you can even surrender it, right? So,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you have to work with it. So, I guess,
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
there anything else when it comes to those 2 points? This the psychology part of it and
Hmm.
the spiritual advising part that you'd like to touch on.
Yeah. There's so much to say there. And I think that maybe just to put a plug for somebody, the Restore the Glory guys, Dr. Bob Schutz and Jake Kim. That's podcast out of the John Paul II Healing Institute down in Tallahassee, Florida. I went down there and made my diaconate retreat with them, which was a significant stepping stone in this whole journey for me. And listening to them and reading their books over the years has been really fruitful. So anybody who is maybe wanting to learn more about this area and doesn't know where to start, that's where I would point them. Restore the Glory, Be Healed is Dr. Bob Schutz's main book, and then he has several others as well. But maybe just one more spiritual nugget is just to emphasize that this is the Lord's work. Like this is his plan. This is his plan of salvation. It's not first of all us picking ourselves up by our bootstraps or putting on a stethoscope on ourselves and then examining ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're the recipient in this dynamic. We're not the subject. And so it's primary an orientation of receptivity, like Our Lady. And this is why Mary is so key. Like to become more and more receptive to what God is already wanting to do with us and in us and through us, which is love us. And in his love for us and in his loving relationship with us to save us, which is the same, which is congruent with saying to heal us. God is wanting to save us. God is wanting to heal us. And at the same time, God is not waiting for us to be healed before he starts having a relationship with us.
Yeah.
He is already, he has already died for us, for each one of us individually. And now that reality of his death and resurrection for us, which has redeemed us, that reality can be made real, present in each of us, right? Not just like as an abstract concept, like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
happened in history, but like, no, he's wanting to come and make this true for us. So he's already doing it. So now our role is to become receptive to it, become
Yeah.
open to it, and then to shift in that direction, right? So the the what do I do question is secondary to the question of am I open to it?
Mm.
Am I just am I receptive to it? And if no or not completely, that's okay, no shame. But do I want to be? Do I want to become? Am I open to allowing God to expose the layers of defensiveness that I have put up for my own self-protection and self-preservation over my lifetime that has allowed me to survive in this fallen world with a world full of other sinners? Those walls have served their purpose. That's why I put them up.
Yeah.
Am I now open to allowing those walls to be taken down so that God can come closer and closer and closer to me? If I am, he'll work with that. He'll lead, he'll guide. If I'm not, then he won't. Because that's also an expression of his love. It's like his respect for our our autonomy and our freedom and our the radical reality that we're his children.
Yeah,
Like we're his children to such a degree that he allows us to not be in communion with him. Otherwise, would be his slaves.
right. I often think about that. Um, m- in many ways, the religious life or the priesthood has lots of similarities to Christ and God. But the one thing I think that is well like understood or maybe a parallel would be you can't force someone to marry you, right? You can't force someone to love you. So in that you can really understand what it's like maybe in dating almost feel the rejection, right? Or in marriage feel the union, right? The emotional, spiritual union with God, right? And what he's trying to do. So,
Natalie, you said you're not a good listener, and that's a lie of the enemy. You're a wonderful listener. You
I'm
ask very
working
good
on
questions.
I'm working on it. I think, but again, it's easier for I think oftentimes it's easier for someone to ask about a story and want to get to know someone. Um, and I think when it comes to being really familiar with people, you almost take it for granted of that, oh, I know that story. I was there, so I don't need to hear your perspective, right? That kind of thing. So I think it's different when you're really, really close with someone,
Hmm.
or even
Hmm.
like you grew up with family or something, things like that. It could be easier to
Hmm.
just be like, what's the point? Let's get to it and let
Hmm.
me fix
Hmm.
it, or shove it aside, or not
Hmm.
validate it or whatever, right?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
the it's kind of true. I mean, I know someone was talking about marriage, but I think it can be all relationships that are close together. They always talk about like when you like choose to marry someone, you basically say, here's all the ways that you can hurt me. You know me in the most like
Hmm.
vulnerable way possible. And I'm
Hmm.
giving this
Hmm.
to you, and I'm
Hmm.
trusting that you don't hurt me,
Yes. Yes.
right? But I mean,
Yes.
even with family and other relationships, I think that's still true. Like people, when you choose to love someone, regardless of who they are,
Hmm.
they have
Hmm.
that ability. And I think sometimes not meaning to, many people can hurt you because, and it could be usually over little things,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, could be like you say something and then they just, you know, oh, that's cool,
Hmm.
whatever, or don't decide to engage with you in that. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Amen. Yeah, gosh, yeah, there's a lot that I'd love to hear more about in your story and how you've been discovering God's love for you and how you've discovered Aaron's love for you and your love for him and how you've been growing together. And yeah, marriage is a beautiful thing. It is an expression of God's love, right? The communion of persons between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is then, modeled in the marital relationship between Christ and his church, the bridegroom and the bride. And then that's further expressed in the relationship between a husband and a wife, and then their fruitfulness in their children. And you have one baby, is that right?
Yeah.
Or two?
Yeah.
Two.
We
Good.
have two now. I got
Mm-hmm.
pregnant really fast with the second one, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we didn't advertise it as much.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is all new to you, having children, I mean, and encountering them at these stages, and then also encountering yourself, right? Like you just said, discovering this new, yeah, okay, now that my son is now doing this and not just, being present, now that he's saying no to me all the time. Now there's something new that I'm discovering in me, right? That I didn't know before. And
Yeah.
now you're learning to navigate through that.
But it's also hard to be a
Mm.
parent
Mm-hmm.
because um like you and your spouse have to continually like sacrifice your wants and
Mm.
needs and sleep,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to to have these children survive and hopefully be raised in a good way, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah.
This can be a good segue for us. So how are you yeah, how are you going to do that? How are you going to raise them in a good way so that they be children who know that they're children of God and who want to love God in return and want to be practicing Catholics? What are the answers to all those things, Natalie?
I don't have the answers to all of those. I think the one thing I did after Elijah was born, though, this is my
Hmm.
one conscious like decision that I made,
Hmm.
is I stopped listening to anything that wasn't either instrumental,
Hmm.
which there are a couple of like newer like artists that I listen to that are instrumental, but then
Hmm.
um anything that wasn't Christian, specifically
Hmm.
Catholic, because
Hmm.
I'm not really huge into like worship music, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
what I would consider non-denominational worship music,
Right.
or even like Catholic hymns that are like, you know, written after the 18th century,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
to be
Hmm.
honest.
Sure.
But but I cut that out purposely
Hmm.
because my mom always would tell us like you are what you consume. So
Hmm.
like you
Hmm.
are whatever media you consume.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I've tried to make a really conscious choice of only having Catholic influences. And
Hmm.
maybe I'm just burying myself in a hole, but also it's like if my kids get one thing out of how I raise them, I hope that they know that their faith is important. So,
Hmm.
but I found some really great artists. The Hillbilly Thomas are probably my favorite.
Hmm.
Brother
Hmm. Hmm.
Isaiah is another really good artist that I really like. There's the
Hmm.
Franciscan brothers, the Franciscans of the Renewal. They also have a
Hmm.
band. They're more worship music. I don't listen to them as much,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but yeah, that's that and trying to pray as a family.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. Yeah, I think you're already hitting on a really key theme, which is the theme of culture, right? To be able to
Yeah,
provide a Catholic culture for one's family, which is
I
not the default, right? The default is secular culture.
absolutely.
And so the Catholic family has to be really intentional about saying, no, we're in a sense, I mean, the word bubble has a pejorative sense, which I get. Like we don't exist in isolation. And at the end of the day, real evil is in each of our hearts. So it's not like we can just circle the wagons and then pretend like there's no evil within the circle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But but there's but that doesn't mean that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can say, no, there's something healthy about having a Catholic bubble or a Catholic greenhouse or whatever analogy we want to use of like, no, we got to have a Catholic culture within the house, within our family group, right? Like various families together, we bond together and we create this Catholic culture. And so now our children are growing up in this Catholic environment, one that's it's not fake. I mean, there's no fake culture. Like the secular culture is just as fake or just as real as Catholic culture.
yeah.
If we're going to try to judge whether something is fake just because we're creating it intentionally. No, I mean secular culture is being created intentionally as well. And so if that makes something fake, then secular culture is fake also. No, it's just to say we're going to create a Catholic culture. We're going to cultivate that Catholic culture, and this is going to provide the space for our children to to grow, to develop, to mature in a healthy way.
Yeah. I think this is the point where we should explain that our surprise is that you're going to be coming on and do a monthly segment on our podcast, talking to families about the questions of how to raise holy children or how to raise good Catholics. So,
Hmm.
let me just start. I'm just going to give you a couple quick fire questions, and then we
Hmm.
can touch on that to kind of promote for your new segment. So,
Great.
the first one is, what has been the heart of you deciding that you wanted to do this? I guess
Hmm.
so. What has really motivated you to say this is something that I think is important and is a
Hmm.
need?
Hmm. Gosh, that's a good question. I would say. it grew, first of all, out of just an observation of my own life, my own family life growing up, and then in the sense of, we did Catholic things, but we didn't live as a Catholic family, as I now understand that to be. And then many of my peers in high school were the same, and high school and college from Catholic families, and none of them are practicing the faith now as adults. And then through seminary, becoming getting to know lots of seminarians and lots of families that are very plugged in, very supportive of the church and of seminarians, and becoming very close with many of them, and seeing many of them be really healthy, really loving. No one's perfect, no family's perfect, no individual's perfect, and, apart from
Mhm.
the canonized saints and the ones that are in heaven. But all of us who are still struggling through this valley of tears, we're still being sanctified. And so this is not to induce shame on anyone who has not been has not been doing the things we're going to be talking about, or has not, or whose children have already grown up and they're not practicing the faith. This is not to cast stones on anyone. This is all very complicated, and we're not interested in that. And at the end of the day, God's a very merciful God, and we can always come to Him and ask for forgiveness, and He can forgive us for the failures that we've had, whether we knew that we were failing or not. He can still forgive us for all of that. But I started to notice going through seminary that there are lots of families that are, maybe if we can say, successful or effective at transmitting the faith, transmitting Catholicism to their children, and then gone their children have gone on to live as intentional disciples, as practicing Catholics, as adults, and now they're priests and religious, or they're married husbands and wives, and they're raising their families. And I mean, to very to like 100% success rates, right? So like four
Yeah.
for four, and six for six, and eight for eight, and 11 for 11. I have one couple in particular that I'll be talking to. The husband is from a family of five siblings. All five of them are practicing the faith as adults. The wife is from a family of 11. All 11 of them are practicing the faith as adults.
Wow. All
Now,
11. That's
all 11. Yeah.
that's great.
Yes. And they're rare compared to the population at large, including the Catholic population at large. They're a very small sample size, but they're not, it's not, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's not like they don't exist, right?
Right.
They do exist. And so, and there's several in Idaho, in Oregon, in Minnesota. And so my question is, like, can we identify what what was in place in their upbringing that has facilitated their receptivity to God and to the Catholic faith?
Yeah.
And if we can identify what those things are, can those things be articulated and be emulated by other families who are also trying to do the same? And so this, one, I think we've settled on this name, right? I mean, I pitched it to you. I haven't heard any pushback, so I think we're going with it. This title of Generational Catholicism,
Yeah.
right? This emphasis on one passing Catholicism that's passed from one generation to the other, and that's very distinct from the majority. There was just an article in the ICR a month ago that shared a statistic that only 15% of adult Catholics, or
Yeah.
15% of Catholics who are raised in Catholic households, go on to become practicing Catholics as adults. And
Yeah.
the article unpacks some things, and we can talk about that. But the question and the orientation of this segment, generational Catholicism, is okay. So 15% of the Catholic population at large, but then 100% for these families, for
Yeah.
these, unique,
Yeah.
or not unique, but for these, what is it? What's the word here?
Minority maybe?
Minority, these outliers. right? These
That's a better
outstanding,
word.
literally in the sense of they stand outside of the norm. So is there something, and can we identify what differentiates that 15%, or I guess that 85% of families and children who aren't practicing the faith as adults, differentiate then the features, the characteristics to the families that did have that 100% success rate. And again, just to reiterate, um, this is not to induce shame on the families who didn't. It's a complicated system, or not system, not the right word. It's a complicated question, and even, and I want to add this, and I'll stop here. At the end of the day, everyone has their own free will,
Yeah,
and so praise God that 5 for 5, 11 for 11, and 4 for 4. Praise God that all of them have decided to continue to live a Catholic life. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just because their parents did everything perfectly.
absolutely.
It was because they chose it. At the end of the day, they chose it. And so even if you could have Mary and Joseph, theoretically raising kids, and they can be the perfect parents, but the children are still going to make their choices. And so if anyone out there, is listening to this and saying, well, I did everything I could and my kids still made their choices. A couple of things there. First is, okay, maybe you were a perfect parent, and I understand that they decided to walk away, like they have that choice. So no shame. But also, are is it possible that there are some things that maybe you didn't know about or that you were misinformed about that um, that could have been different? And we can't go back and change the past, but if that's the case, if there were something that was in place that could have been different, and you would have made for a better culture or a better environment, then are those things still in your heart now?
Mm.
If so, like, there's an invitation, let's explore that, so that we can let that go,
Yeah.
so that that can be that obstacle that's in there between you and the Lord. That obstacle can be removed, can be dissolved, so that, okay, maybe your children aren't going to change their minds because they're going to make their own choices, but maybe now there's a deeper level of intimacy here that can take place between you and Christ today.
Yeah.
And then, of course, also for the families who are currently raising their kids. You are wanting to know, you, Natalie, are one of them. And then
Yes. Yeah.
maybe there are other listeners out there. And I don't have the answers. I'm an observer and I'm investigating, but I'm going to be talking to these families, and we're going to be trying to explore this together. What are these features? Can we articulate them? Can we define them? Can we replicate them so that we can all have a deeper and deeper relationship with the Lord?
I'm actually really excited for this segment, being a mom of young children, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I think the thing that would be really interesting to hear is if there were parents that work versus not work, and if they both have 100%, you know,
Hmm.
retention level. It
Hmm.
sounds so
Hmm. Hmm.
business-like, but
Right, right. Yeah.
but if their kids are all practicing, it'd be interesting to hear about that, or, discipline styles. I mean, you
Hmm.
could really, the parenting thing, anyone with kids that's Catholic, well, anyone with kids who's really interested in how to parent, because you want to parent the best you can. You want to have respectful kids, but you also want to, have a loving relationship with them where, they can flourish. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
very excited for this. So, my next
Yeah.
question is, what are
Hmm.
you most excited about going down and doing this research?
Yes. Well, a number of things, and this also relates to your previous question. What led you to want to do this, or how did you discover this desire to do this? Is, first of all, I love these families, these people that I'm talking about, and so I'm excited about the opportunity to spending more time with them and having these conversations with them. So that's, I think, first and foremost. Also, maybe discovering some of these answers that may be fruitful for us, those having the conversations, and then perhaps also for other listeners. Maybe, you know, I know you're going to have like a million listeners to your segments three
Oh,
times a month,
stop.
Natalie, but
Stop.
for mine, the 10 people that tune in, they hopefully they'll find it fruitful. But also, to just scale that to the next level is like I think the I think there's a lot of ink spilled, so to speak, into the question of how to improve the parish. And as a parish
Mhm.
priest, that's kind of foremost in my work, right? In my ministry is like how can we improve the programs? How can we improve the liturgy? How can we improve communication? How can we improve um, sacramental preparation? All these things. And those are all important questions. But I think an oft neglected side or chapter of this question is, the family are the parents are the primary educators of the children, and that
Mhm.
includes in regards to religious formation. And so the it seems to me that the one major element of improving the life of the parish is precisely improving the life of the home
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And that's that's not really something that can be done, or maybe that can be exhausted in an event at the church.
Yeah.
Maybe you can have like a family ministry, and I know there are parishes that have them where families get together in the hall once a week, once a month. They have a talk, they have a meal, they get together, they pray a rosary. That's wonderful. But that's still 1 hour a week at best, or 2 hours a week at best. There are still, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whatever that number is, minus two. There's still that many number hours left in the week where it's the family living the family life as a
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And that's really where it seems to me that's really the meat and potatoes. It's the life of the family. And so if that can be improved and then that can be scaled, that's really going to improve the life of the parish.
I'm I'm so excited to hear about this. I'm very interested in this topic. I think the thing that I wish that I could see would be having like a Catholic village.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'm excited to say that we've made some friends that we get together with once a week, right?
Hmm.
And again,
Hmm.
it's a couple hours once a week, but
Hmm.
it starts to feel more like a village, and it would be great if, if you're right, if there were more ways to come together as a parish and to support the young families, because
Hmm. Hmm.
in a way it is the children, and
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
the children are the future of the church. Depending on where you go to church, there are people that are more accepting or less accepting of
Hmm.
children in
Hmm.
mass. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I think it's really important for young families who are doing their best to get their kids to go. And it would be awesome if we had a village.
Yes, I'm not denying the importance of your question. That's a very important question. Like, how can we make mass more inviting to young families? How can we make the life of the parish more inviting to young families? All of those things. But that's even if we have like the most inviting mass possible, whatever that looks like, most inviting for mass, that's still only 1 hour a week, or maybe an hour and a half a
Yeah,
week.
absolutely.
What I'm really interested in is, or not exclusively, but what I'm focusing on here is like, what are families doing at home? Are there things like, does it matter what time you get up and what time you go to bed? Does it matter like how you discipline? Like, hey, one little example from that couple that I mentioned, when the 4-year-old said something disrespectful towards the mom, the dad immediately, not brutally, but firmly, immediately corrected him and held him accountable. Like, you don't talk to your
Yeah,
mother that way. Like,
yeah,
apologize right now and say yes, mom. And they have that loving relationship with each other, father son. there's already that warm and affectionate bond. This article from the the newspaper that I mentioned, Dr. Popchak points out that a warm and affectionate home is indispensable. Like it starts with that. Do you have a warm and affectionate home? And then then the other things, it's not the only piece of the puzzle. There are other things that have to be in place. But if the home is not warm and affectionate, then the other things are not going
Yeah.
to take hold.
Yeah.
They're going to be rejected. They're going to be resisted. And so this father son, they have a warm and affectionate home and a warm and affectionate relationship. But then within that context, the 4-year-old son disrespects the mom in front of the dad. The dad says that's not acceptable, and so apology. So it's like, and those things that's going to happen 20 times a day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That to me, is way more. It seems to me, at least, this is, I guess, the hypothesis is that that's way more um, impactful on the spiritual, human, religious formation of the children than, what kind of music is going on at church. Again, don't get me wrong, that's important. We got to have good
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree with you on much, if not all, of what you said about worship music, especially worship music in the context of the liturgy. But yes, let's have the best music possible. Let's have the most welcoming mass possible. Let's have all the great programs for families possible. But that's still just a sliver of the pie. That's a tiny piece of the pie.
Yeah, you're
The
right.
the like 98% of the pie is these like daily habits that are going on at home.
Yeah. Well, is there any final tidbits that you'd like to give any of the listeners for your upcoming segments?
I've talked to some families and gotten their initial buy-in, but we're still very much in the development stages of when and how we're going to have those conversations and exactly what we'll talk about and how to facilitate communication between them, because what I've tried to do is have families that are kind of in different stages of their life. So, so there are couples that have already raised children. So for example, the 5 and the 11, the parents of the 5, they're on board. I'll be talking to them. I haven't talked to the parents of the 11 yet. I'll see if I can talk to them, but to start getting their buy-in. So that's kind of one demographic, right? Basically the grandparents, the ones whose adult children are all practicing the faith. But then there's one set of parents who they have kids that are out of the house and they have kids that are in the house. So there's
Yeah.
so kind of they um they have that demographic of, I don't know, what, maybe middle age, I guess, is what that that number is. Middle age in my mind has like a negative connotation of like, oh, you're old. That's probably just because
No,
I'm almost there.
teens, maybe
Yeah.
teens, young adults. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The kids are at that age, but the parents are, in their 40s and 50s.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm And then and then the next was like kind of starting out, and you have young kids. All the kids are in the house. They're all children still, and maybe nobody's a teenager yet or becoming a teenager. And yeah, so I look forward to speaking with them and then trying to facilitate, communication between them and questions and answers between them, and so the transmission of wisdom in between them and making that in a way that's accessible to the broader audience. But yeah, I guess I would just ask everybody to pray for this project, that it be fruitful, that it glorify God, that um, it achieves its goals of finding some answers to these questions, and that the answers be communicated in ways that are helpful to families. Um, yeah, please pray.
I think the other thing that we'll do is we'll make a forum so that if anyone has questions that they would like some of the couples to answer, I
hmm
think
hmm
we'll put that up there. So if anyone has questions out there, just go
hmm
ahead
hmm
and we'll link the form down in the description. and
Hmm.
you can ask the questions, and we'll link that every time you have a podcast so that um, that our local listeners will have answers.
Wonderful. Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. And I can hear, a couple of these families that I've talked to, the ones with younger kids, I can hear their answer to that already, which is we don't know what the answers to those questions are. We have no idea. We're just starting out. They have this disposition of humility. Like we're not coming at this as experts. We're not, sitting on the mountaintop with all of our wisdom that we're going to dispense on the lowly world. No, no, it's like we're all students,
Yeah.
we're trying to learn. The parents, the grandparents now, the ones whose parents are all practicing, the ones that I've talked to, they also have this disposition. It's like, uh, we really have no idea. It's like it's just purely the grace of God. That's the only thing we can accredit it to. And so there's truth to that, of course, but I think we can press them a little bit and get them to spill out some of their wisdom again, even against their will.
Makes me think of making wine. You got to squeeze the grapes to make
That's
wine.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Well, Father, would you like to end us in a prayer?
Sure. Be happy to. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Father, we thank you for this day and this opportunity for me and Natalie to have this long conversation. We thank you for all that has gone into this project and all that will be going into it. We ask you to bless it. We ask you to continue to center us in you, to continue to ground us in your love and in your mercy. I ask you to not allow us to grow in pride or self-reliance or any kind of vanity about the work that we're doing. That it be all directed to you, to bring you glory and to build up your church, and especially to build up the families, build up all the families that will be listening. Um, we entrust all of this to Our Lady, to her care, to her guidance, to her wisdom, to her accompaniment. We ask you, Mary, to continue to be the mother to us that you are, and to mother the children that hopefully will benefit from the wisdom communicated through this show. As we pray, and I'll pray, Natalie, I'll pray the first half if you pray the second. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desert Wanderers. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up as well as subscribe down below. We're produced by Salt and Light Radio, so you can find us on social platforms at Salt and Light Radio or Desert Wanderers Podcast. We produce episodes every week and we launch them for you on Wednesdays. So make sure to tune in for next week's episode, and we'll see you then.